speaking for Washington, D.C. from the West Coast, Los Angeles this morning. And very excited. It's a different experience. You know, normally I'm on Zoom and I can at least see faces on a computer. This morning I'm literally sitting in an empty temple with one of the brahmacharis behind the computer. And I have to imagine you. I have to imagine your presence. So it's very much like spiritual practice sometimes. I know that you're there. I know that you're watching, but I have to just imagine and believe it, to just take faith in that. So this morning I'm excited to share a lot of these things. I gave a lecture similar to this one here last, 2 weeks ago, I guess, or somewhere around there. And it's changed and it's grown, and I've had some time for it to marinate inside. So I'm excited about sharing it and offering it to the beloved this morning. Before I start, always to kind of poke the heart, to wake up that divine feeling inside, I like to read from the poetry of Hafiz. He's from the 1500s and a real lover of the divine, one of the mystics. This one is called In Need of Breath. My heart, it's an unset jewel upon the tender night, yearning for its dear old friend, the moon. When the nameless one debuts again, 10,000 facets of my being unfurl their wings and reveal such a radiance inside. I enter a divine realm. I too begin to sweetly cast light, like a lamp, through the streets of this world. My heart, it's an unset jewel upon existence, waiting, just waiting for the friend's touch. Tonight, my heart is an unset ruby offered, bowed, and weeping to the sky. I am dying in these cold hours for the resplendent glance of the beloved. I am dying because of a divine remembrance of who I really am. Hafiz, tonight your soul is a brilliant reed instrument in need of the breath of the divine. I love that notion. Tonight my soul is a divine reed instrument in need of the breath of the divine. That breath of the divine, that absolute love, that unconditioned love, that's our nature, that's trying to be expressed despite the efforts of our ego to, to mold it into something selfish, to mold it into a means of getting instead of an expression of giving, of caring. It says in the scriptures, in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that this Maya, that is to say the ego, is like a cloud. The sun cannot be seen on account of a thin patch of cloud. When that disappears, one sees the sun. If by the grace of the Guru one's ego vanishes, then one sees God. This here's something right there that we all want. Everybody wants, even the atheist demands. Where is this God you speak of? We want to see him. Show him to us. He goes on, he says, Rama, who is God himself, was only 2.5 cubits ahead of Lakshmana. But Lakshmana couldn't see him because Sita stood between them. So Rama and Sita are walking in front of Lakshmana, and he's behind the Sita, and he can't see Rama, in front, because someone is standing in between. So Lakshmana may be compared to the jiva, to your soul, and Sita to Maya, to this world that you're beholding, this world in front of you right now. Man cannot see God on account of the barrier of Maya. Just look. I am creating a barrier in front of my face with this towel. So Ramakrishna is holding a towel up in front of his face to make this point. He says, now you can't see me, even though I am so near to you. Likewise, God is the nearest of all, but we cannot see him on account of this covering of Maya. This jiva is nothing but the embodiment of Sat Chit Ananda, the embodiment of love, the embodiment of our intelligence, and the manifestation of existence itself. But since Maya, or ego, you see, Maya and ego are the same. They're synonyms. It is because of our ego, because of our wrong idea of ourself, that we see this world as it appears and not as it is, because we're seeing it from an inaccurate perspective. And since it's a relative world, everything that we know has lines of relativity directly to us and our notion of self. And because our notion of self is wrong, this whole world as we see it is seen incorrectly, inaccurately. It's seen as this throng of dualities, right and wrong, good and bad, friendly and mean, beautiful and ugly, fat and thin, rich and poor. The whole world takes on this dualistic perspective because we have that dualistic perspective inside. We have our real self, which we do feel. We do know it's there. We can sense it. It's this love that's excited any time by our desires, this love that's reflected in all the things that we want in this world. So we know our divine nature, and then we have this ego self that's always arguing with it. And that's why we have this experience of being two people. Do we not? We talk to ourselves constantly. Thinking is a process of just talking to ourselves. That all exists because of our inaccurate perspective of ourself. Living in that inaccuracy creates a separate island of me and mine that I live on, while my true self, infinite, ever free and ever pure, is constantly trying to manifest freely and unconditioned, to give constantly, to love constantly, to be free forever. But my ego self is constantly trying to take that infinite energy of love, that motivating power, and trying to use it to grab, to own, to take, to protect, to secure, to rule in whatever its sense of desire or lack may be. And because of that, we cannot see two things. One, in that last sentence where Thakur says, God is the nearest of all. We can't experience the most beautiful thing about life because of this ego self, because of this wrong notion of who we are. We can't enjoy the intimacy, the nearness of the beloved. We can't feel that reality. We can't take refuge in that security. We can't take peace from that infinite well because of this ego, this wrong thinking. We cannot see him on account of this Maya. But since Maya, or the ego, has created various upadis, he has forgotten his real self. So how is it? What is this ego doing to us? There's a wonderful little paragraph here about upadis where the Ramakrishna goes on. He says, each upadi, or each of these waves, or each of these implications of having an ego, things that reverberate that ego, he says, each upadi changes man's nature. Your sense of self, who you are, changes your nature. It changes how you express your infinite, unconditioned well of love that's trying to come out through all that your organs of action, as it were, in this world. But it's coming through an ego, it's coming through a distorted mind, so it doesn't come out as unconditioned. It comes out as your preferences and your aversions, your frustrations and your successes. All of these things in this world, it gets directed, it becomes a little directional hose instead of this great inundating storm of love, as it were. So each one of these attachments that you have, each one of these ideas of self that you have, he says it changes your nature. It changes how you exist, what you look like in this world. He says, if you wear a fine black bordered cloth, you will at once find him humming Nidhu Babu's love songs. So what you wear affects how you see yourself. It changes your character in the world. Something as simple as that, as meaningless as that, changes your sense of self. He's saying here, if you go and dress up in a fancy, beautiful outfit, you'll hum along singing, romantic love songs to yourself. Then playing cards and a walking stick will follow. if we don't let go of these things, that wrong thinking, not only will you have the confidence or build your sense of self on how you look, but then you start doing casual, meaningless things, you know, as the way to spend your life. Things that have no lasting effect, things that just fritter away time and distract the mind. He says, then playing cards and a walking stick follow. If even a sickly man puts on high boots, he begins to whistle and climb the stairs like an Englishman, jumping from one step to another, two at a time. If a man but holds a pen in his hand, he scribbles on any paper he can get hold of. Such is the power of the pen. He says, money. Oh boy. Money is also an upadi, this expression, this ripple that affects our nature, affects who we think we are. Money is also a great upadi. The possession of money makes such a difference in a man. He is no longer the same person. He says a Brahmin used to frequent the temple garden, and outwardly he was very modest. One day I went to Konagar with Hriday. No sooner did we get off the boat than we noted this Brahmin seated on the bank of the river. We thought that he had been enjoying the fresh air. Looking at us, he said, "Hello there, priest. How do you do?" I marked his tone and said to Hriday, "This man must have got some money. That's why he talks that way." And Hriday laughs out loud. So this notion of privilege, of entitlement, you know, which drips off of us in this culture in particular. You know, this notion of wealth. You look at our ideal, we worship it. Look at our pop stars, you know, holding up fans of money and wearing their bling and their jewelry as if it's meaningful, as if it's a statement of some kind to them, as if it won't be left in a pile on their dresser when their body dies and decays. So these ideas of self and the places that we garnish these notions of self are what prevent us from enjoying the very fulfillment of life, from enjoying the things that make every moment, this eternal moment, meaningful, beautiful, rich, profound, and full of wonder. We give that up for things that change, things that rot, things that disappear, things that do not bring security, things that do not bring strength, things that do not build character. We grab onto these things as if they are what we are. And that infinite well of love, eager to be expressed and manifested in this divine world of the beloved, gets choked out into a little water gun stream of desire, of take, of me and mine, and we're crippled, and we're darkened, and we're diminished. He says a frog had a rupee, which he kept in his hole, and one day an elephant was going over that hole, and the frog came out in a fit of anger, raised his foot as if to kick the elephant, and said, "How dare you walk over my head?" Such is the pride that money begets. But one can get rid of this ego. There's the promise. This chokehold of ignorance that has us wrestled to the ground. It can be given up. It can be gotten rid of, he says, after the attainment of knowledge. Now we know from one of the very first conversations that Ramakrishna had with one of the devotees that knowledge that he's talking about is not a tower of relative knowledge between objects in the mind. It's not a thought castle. We've talked about that many times. This knowledge is a profundity that rises up best in silence. And when I say silence, I mean the absence of ego, the absence of someone who always has something to say, always has something to teach, always has something to joke about. No, this is that silence of intimacy, sitting next to a lover, holding hands, needing nothing more. You know, I talk of that old couple that I saw in New York City that always is the perfect example of that to me. They sat there. I was at the Museum of Modern Art there doing study for a lecture, actually. And I was in the cafe eating with a friend, and I saw this couple. Now, the cafe was very noisy, lots of movement going around, and of course, a modern art museum in New York City is the height of pretensions, the height of all of these upadis that define us incorrectly. And I'm sitting in the midst of all of this noise and cacophony, and this couple, this old couple, is sitting there silently across this little table from each other, both of them with their hand on the table and just their fingers touching. And they're not talking, and they're just barely eating. But there's a silence around them. They've been together for a long time. All the words are spoken that were necessary. All the stories have been told that have happened. And now it's just the comfort of being, that company, knowing that the other person is there. And this is that knowledge that Sri Ramakrishna is talking about. It's that knowledge of your divine nature, that God is close, that God is your true nature, and that an unbridled expression of love and intelligence through your existence is the meaning and purpose of your life. To be in constant companionship with this notion of unity, this oneness of all things. All of the desires are spent. All of your needs have vanished. All of the frenetic energy of life dissipated. And you sit with your hand on the table of being, just touching the fingers of the divine. And that's all that's necessary. That is the fulfillment of life. Ramakrishna is being treated by a doctor for his throat cancer. And the doctor asks him a very pertinent question for our talk right now. He says, "What is the meaning of ego and all that you are talking about? You must explain it to me. Do you mean to say that God is playing tricks on us?" The master smiling at the idea of God playing tricks, because of course it's the divine playing tricks on all of us, which is us playing tricks on ourselves. I often like to think that's why this puzzle of life is so challenging, because we think we're pretty smart. And when we created this puzzle for ourselves, in our state of one without a second, when I imagine myself deciding to become the many at some point, in that make-believe scenario of how the world began. And I created a puzzle to lose myself in. You're doggone right, it has to be a good puzzle. I would have solved it in 15 minutes if it wasn't. This one has to last a lifetime, has to keep me engaged, keep me trying for a whole lifetime. So this puzzle of the ego, it is rather complex, and it is in fact a joke played by ourself on ourself. That thing which keeps us unnecessarily locked up, that thing which makes us unnecessarily small and insecure, that thing which makes us, susceptible to all of the senses and the thoughts of our mind, to constantly be out of balance, never knowing securely what and who we are. Yes, what is the meaning of this ego? The master, of course, smiling. It is God who has kept this ego in us. Yes. And we must remember when we do this, because our first thought when we hear, oh, it's God keeping this ego in me, it's like, well, then it's not my fault. I can be as egotistic as I want, and I don't have to deal with this thing. God's made me this way. I'll just be this horrible person that I am. But then Ramakrishna would keep smiling, because he'd know you're just playing the game, lost in the game. And he would just ask you, but who are you, really? You are that God who keeps the ego within you. You are that. So he smiles. He says, all of this is his play, his leela. This is the game of the divine. A king has 4 sons, and they are all princes. But when they play, one becomes a minister, another a police officer, and so on. Though a prince, he plays as a police officer. And this is the nature of the game that we're in. This is a reference to those upadis. I am the one indivisible Satchit Ananda, ever free, ever pure. I am not a body. I'm not a mind. I am not limited by birth and death. I am existence absolute. I am knowledge, intelligence absolute. I am love, Ananda, bliss, absolute. But today I'm a Swami, talking in an empty room, having a great faith that an audience exists somewhere. These are the upadhis that we've taken on for our playing of this game. Vijay, hearing this conversation, says, "Sir, why are we bound like this? Why don't we see God?" And I have this paragraph highlighted in red. This is the central gem here. He says, Maya is nothing but egotism of the embodied soul. This egotism has covered everything like a veil. All troubles come to an end when the ego dies. You see there, all of the trouble of your life is because of ego. Sri Ramakrishna just said, all troubles come to an end at the death of this ego, this me and mine, this virus of selfishness that's inside. He says, if by the grace of God a man but once realizes that he is not the doer, then he at once becomes a jivan mukta. He at once becomes free while living, a seer, a sage, a man of knowledge, a man who knows the moment to be God, who lives freely, unafraid, knowing that the soul cannot be burned, cannot be wedded, cannot be added to or taken away from, that he is that absolute divine self, merely watching a play, watching a dream of expression, a dream that expresses love in all of its forms. If by the grace of God a man but once realizes that he is not the doer, then he at once becomes a jivan mukta. Though living in the body, he is liberated. He has nothing else to fear. This is our goal. To be free of this wrong idea of self, to get rid of this ego which is causing all of the troubles, all of the fears, all of the insecurities, all of the hungers, all of the sadness. It is the container of all of our attachments. It is the container of all of our lacking. And it is the container of all of our hopes for an ideal day sometime in the future that will never come. The future is your imagination. The joy you have from your desires is the joy of this moment. If it isn't good enough for you, if you are not content here and now, where will you go? For wherever you are, there you are, here and now. This moment has to become perfect for you. This moment, it's not something that needs to change so that the next moment, the next imagined moment, because this moment is one, it's eternal. There's not multiple moments. There's one unending, unbeginning moment that we inhabit. And in it, you have to find this truth. It's not something you plan. It's not something you achieve. It's not somewhere you go. It's somewhere that you have to see as you've always been there. To the doctor, Ramakrishna turns and says, listen, if you realize Atman, if you realize this oneness, if you realize who you really are, you will see the truth of all I have said. All doubts disappear after this vision of God. This is where you find that security of knowing, this experience, this vision of the divine. It's not an imagined thought castle. It's not a philosophy that gives peace to the mind. It's a knowing of the nature of things. It's a knowing that transcends the idea of a fact. There's a deep, profound isness to this knowledge. It wells up from the silence deep within, that which is real and alone. The doctor responds, but is it ever possible to get rid of all doubts? Right, interesting, a doctor, so he's a wealthy man. He's got his life together. And he's saying, will anything make me secure? Is it possible to live without doubts? Is it possible to live without being insecure and unknowing and finite and small? Is that such a thing possible? And the master says to you, says to me, says to the doctor, learn from me as much as I have told you. But if you want to know more, you have to pray to God in solitude. Ask Him why he has so ordained. So Thakur is saying, yes, get the hint from me. I am telling you that your sense of self is wrong, that it's the cause of all the misery in your life, that it is the reason you cannot see God. It is the reason that your religion is imagined, pretended. It is the reason for your insecurity and your shortcomings. But if you want out, if you want to know the truth, listen to what I've told you. Let that be the motive for finding out more. Let that be the seed that you nurture now by going into solitude, which means going into yourself, by yourself, going inside. And in that solitude, in that quiet, in that communion with your own nature, which is that divinity, which is God himself, ask, who are you? Who am I? What am I? What is this life? Why is it like this? And in that solitude and in that silence, become an ear who listens to be in harmony with the universe. In the state of sattva, in the state of balance, in the state of contentment, in the state of purity, we see the very nature of things. We go beyond the senses, and we go beyond reason. This ego dwells in the world of thought. This ego is built by your imagined past. This past that you imagine as being the collection of all of your attachments, all the things you've put into your memory to take with you on this journey through life. This false sense of past has given birth to this ego, to this notion of who you are, this wrong idea of self. It's blocking your vision of God. But in this moment of peace, this moment of sattva, what is that moment? That moment when we're not running after our desires, frenetically trying to fulfill something or accomplish something or do something, or not running from something or hiding from something in a state of dullness, a state of brokenness or depression. We go beyond the senses, beyond reason. We go out of mind, realizing God is not a thought process. It's a surrendering of this history that has built an ego, a surrendering of your story of who you think you are. It's the surrendering of the story that tells you what you will become and what you can accomplish and what you might do or be at some imagined day in the future. It's laying that down. How? Not just by making some token idea of giving it to God in some way that's meaningless. It's stopping that thought process. It's removing your sense of I from it. I'm not my past. That story is irrelevant to me. I am not the future. That story is irrelevant. I am here and now, and I am ever free and ever pure and ever blissful. And I live for the expression of love. I await in this moment to be available to service, to love, to care, to be. In the state of this sattva, we will see the very nature of things, Vivekananda says. We go beyond the senses and beyond reason. We stop thinking, stop cognating, not in the sense that you become dull and lifeless. That's impossible. It's not your nature to be dull and lifeless. You are Satchitananda, love, existence, bliss, absolute. That's who you are. So if you stop thinking, if you stop cognating, if you stop owning your idea of self and stop trying to build it and present it and offer it as this thing to yourself, then you can see the true nature of things. These appearances will dissipate, and this knowledge born of the silent wonder of being will become available to you. Vivekananda goes on to say, this adamantine wall that shuts us in is egoism. We refer everything to ourselves. Every piece of knowledge that you have is related to you somehow. That's how you know it. You've established the relationship. That is worldly knowledge. He says, get rid of this puny I. Get rid of this meaningless sense of self that you have that's built on a body that already is on its way to death, that's built on a mind which is already semi-insane and unreasonable and moody and childish and selfishly oriented. Get rid of this puny I. Kill this diabolism in us. Not I, but thou. That is the cry of a free soul. Say it, feel it, live it. Until we give up the world manufactured by the ego, never can we enter the kingdom of heaven. None ever did, none ever will. You will not be the exception. Give up this puny sense of I, this meaningless body and all the egotism that surrounds it like a solar system. You know, this whole notion of your importance and your greatness and your sweetness and your wonderness and your holiness and your achievements and your crowning personality, lovable and witty and funny. Kill it. It is preventing you from seeing everything meaningful in your life. It is preventing you from seeing your strength, seeing your wonder, seeing your potential for infinite, unconditioned love and service. That one piece of knowledge that makes the most meaningless, fetid thing beautiful, profound, and meaningful. Ramakrishna tells a parable that I didn't realize was about the ego. Maybe he's just framing it in this circumstance that way. But it's a very familiar parable, and it goes like this. There was once a man who had acquired the power to tame ghosts. One day, at his summons, a ghost appeared, and the ghost said, "Well, now tell me what you want me to do. The moment you cannot give me any work, I shall break your neck." He's in a conundrum now, huh? That man had many things to accomplish, and he had the ghost do them all, one by one. At last he could find nothing more for the ghost to do. "Now," said the ghost, "I'm going to break your neck." Now I read this, Thakur doesn't necessarily talk about it in this way, but in a sense, almost, this ghost, although the ego is going to be something else in this story, but as a matter of exercise, you could see this ghost as being your ego, your sense of doership. Remember that very first thing we read today was that we're set free when man realizes he is not the doer. When you realize that you are not doing anything, you in your nature are the witness of mind, the witness of body. All action is a matter of karma, and karma belongs to mind, and you are not that mind. So when you know that you're not the doer, you're set free. But as long as you think you're the doer, you have this ghost that's doing all of these things. And that ghost has to be constantly occupied. Your ego has to be constantly busied. Otherwise you get bored and you get mean and you get, you're constantly have this sense of dissatisfaction. It's the restlessness of the mind. So in a sense, we could, as a form of exercise, see this ghost demanding a constant stream of things to do, things to learn, things to accomplish, as being the ego itself. And when you're no longer able to keep it busy, it will break you. You see that in an old folks' home, broken people whose purpose of life is behind them, people who have been discarded, because they're no longer able to do what they thought they were. They're no longer a CEO of a company. They're no longer president of a country. They're no longer significant because the world belongs to the young and its propagation belongs to the energetic. And in your old age, what can you do? So this ego will break your neck. At last he could not find any more for the ghost to do. "Now," said the ghost, "I'm going to break your neck." "Wait a minute." "Hold on," said the man. "I shall return presently." And he ran to his teacher. So this ego is going to break your neck. This ghost is going to break your neck. Where do you need to run? Run to your teacher. Run to your guru. Run to your highest ideal. Run to Jesus, run to Ramakrishna, run to Buddha, run to Krishna, run to Rama, run to your highest ideal, run to your teacher, and learn. So he says, the man says, wait, I'm going to run to my teacher. And he ran to his teacher and said, revered sir, I'm in great danger. So he's recognized the danger of ignorance. This is my trouble. And he told his teacher his trouble and asked, what shall I do now? The teacher said, well, do this. Tell the ghost to straighten this kinky hair. The ghost devoted itself day and night to straightening the hair, but he would make it straight and let go of it, and suddenly the hair remained kinky again, popped right back into its old form. Likewise, the ego seems to vanish this moment, but it reappears the next. Unless one renounces the ego, one does not receive the grace of God. What does it mean to renounce the ego? It means stop listening to the stories of your mind. Let's put it in those words. Stop listening to the story of your mind. Stop asking your mind how you're doing. Stop asking your body how you feel. Let them be what they are. You remember your nature. Remember your relationship is by choice with this body-mind world. You are not affected by it unless you identify yourself as being it. Renouncing the ego is to renounce the mind, the thought world, this thought castle, the world of doership. It's a knowing, standing in a place of infinite, meaningful silence and observing the world passing around you as an expression of this self within. Unless one renounces the ego, one does not receive the grace of God. It is on account of the ego that one is not able to see God. In front of the door of God's mansion lies the stump of ego. One cannot enter the mansion without jumping over the stump. Now this is interesting because we're told to obliterate, we're told to renounce. You cannot destroy the ego, just like this kinky hair constantly coming back to its original form. The ego will keep popping up. This sense of I inside keeps popping up. So we have to just continually jump over it. We don't let it block our view of God. We renounce it. We're like, no. That is not my desire. That desire belongs to the body. No, that is not my desire. That desire belongs to the mind. The mind and the body are mechanical objects. They have no sentience, no sense of self. They borrow that from you. When they argue with you, you have given them the sentience being used to commit that argument. Pull yourself away from the body and the mind, and they are no more powerful than a Kleenex laying on the floor. Separate yourself, your sense of knowledge, your sense of being from the body and from the mind. And their needs and passions, their needs and distractions, their aversions and enjoyments become as powerless as a napkin on the floor. In the Gita, it gives us a hint here. He says, water flows continually into the ocean, but the ocean is never disturbed. Desire flows into the mind of the seer, but he is never disturbed. Desire flows into the mind of the seer, and he is never disturbed. The seer knows peace. He knows peace who has forgotten desire. He lives without cravings, free from ego, free from pride. You see, so it's not that your desires disappear. The desires are born of the body and mind. They're going to rise up as images in the mind all the time. Meaningless images, powerless images. Until you touch them with the magic potion or the magic incantation. And what is that magic incantation of the ego? Me, mine. When that thought of a desire arises in the mind, it's just a thought. That's all it is. It's a mechanical process of mind. But the magic words that give it power to destroy you are me and mine. That is my thought. That is my desire. That is my body. That is my endeavor. Those ideas of self subject you to the needs and wants of the body and mind. which have no existence without you. They are meaningless. Forget desire. Just forget it. If you don't think about it, it's not an issue for you. If you say no, and you're a man or a woman of character, your no's are no's and your yeses are yeses, you're not flaky. You don't just show up when you feel like and do what you feel like, but you're a man of self-control, a woman of determination. Then your no is no, your yes is yes. And that is how you deal with the desire. If you're able to say no with your whole self, it will subside. Put your mind at the feet of God. Say the name of God. Think another thought of any kind. And that desire, when it's out of mind, it's gone. Exists no more. So the seer is not disturbed by the desires that arise in the mind. He knows that those desires are not his. He does not use that magical incantation, me and mine. And in the absence of that magical formula, the desire dies. It withers and moves on. He who knows peace has forgotten desire, lives without craving. When your mind knows that your no is no, it won't constantly bring up the idea again and again. And even if it does bring up the idea again and again, the seer uses it as a tool, an exercise for turning the mind inward again to that eternal truth, that bliss, that self-assurance, that knowledge. I'm ever free. I'm ever pure. I am not limited by the body and the mind. I am not limited by birth and death. I am free from ego and free from pride. So as we work to get over the effect of ego by identifying with it, as we keep jumping over the stump to enter the mansion of the divine, Thakur talks about what to do with this ego. How do we live with this plant that keeps reblooming, no matter how many times we trim it all the way down to the ground? In the gospel, it frames it in a very interesting way here, very unique to Ramakrishna, I think. In order to enable the master to work for the welfare of humanity, all right, that's what we would like our life to be, working for the welfare of humanity. The Divine Mother kept in him a trace of ego, which he described according to his mood. So sometimes he described his ego as the ego of knowledge, or the ego of devotion, or the ego of a child, or the ego of a servant. So these are the forms of ego that the mother kept in Ramakrishna, who as an incarnation of God would naturally return to God immediately, return to that sense of self. But in order for our sake, for the good of humanity, he allows himself to attach to this ego of knowledge, knowing God, this ego of a servant, serving God, wanting to give to the beloved, this ego of devotion, the ego of love, wanting to love the divine, wanting to see the divine in everyone, this ego of a child, the child who doesn't hold on to his attachments. One moment is angry at his best friend, the next moment is rolling around, hugging, and having a great deal of fun with his best friend. You know, this ego of a child that's just joyful and free. He says, in any case, this ego of the master was consumed by the knowledge of Brahman, by this knowledge of his oneness, by this knowledge of himself being an unconditioned being, this knowledge of his freedom, this knowledge of this moment being an appearance of reality and not the reality itself. He was consumed with this understanding of himself. He knew that this world was an appearance only, like a burnt string. That is what his ego looked like. It was a burnt string. So he looked like a person, he acted like a person, but he had no attachments to this world. He could let go at any moment and return to that infinite self, to that infinite ideal. He could know in a moment that he was the dreamer and not the dreamed. He was free. So his existence in the dream was like a burnt string, apparent, an appearance, but not a binding reality. He often referred to this ego as the ripe ego, in contrast to the ego that is the bound soul, which he described as the unripe or green ego. And why? Because there's a very big clue here for us. This is huge. He says the ego of the bound soul identifies itself with body, with relatives, with possessions, and the world. But the ripe ego, illumined by divine knowledge, knows the body and the relatives and the possessions and the world to be unreal, and establishes a relationship of love with God alone. Or we could say establishes a relationship of love with love alone, love for its own sake. Though through this ripe ego, Sri Ramakrishna dealt with the world and his wife. So we're going to get a very practical example of what this looked like in him. One day, while stroking his feet, Sharada Devi, his wife, whom the mother worshipped, who was the wife of the master, Sri Sharada Devi asked the master while she's rubbing his feet, "What do you think of me?" You know? "What do you think of me?" "Quick," came the answer, meaning that Thakur knew exactly who she was. He says, "The mother who is worshipped in the temple is the mother who has given birth to my body and is now living in the Nahabat, and it is she again who is stroking my feet at this very moment. Indeed, I always look on you as the personification of the blissful Mother Kali." So you see, a ripe ego knows that it's not the body, knows that it's not the mind, knows that it's not a matter of possessions, it's not a matter of relatives and family, it's not a matter of traditions, it's not a matter of ideas. But the ego is established, the ripe ego is established in the knowledge of being not mind, not body, ever free, ever pure, ever blissful, that one reality without a second. It dwells in that place. It sits soaked in the presence of God in the here and now. This moment is God to the realized soul, to the ripe ego. And everything that the ripe ego sees and experiences is a manifestation of the beloved mother. Everything you see right now, every person you know, every person you will encounter today, if your ego is ripe, you will see them as the Divine Mother. You will understand them accordingly. You will treat them accordingly, not through calculation, but through spontaneous manifestation of who and what you are. Effortless, because ego, which distorts and separates, has been ripened into a knowledge of what you are. The ignorant man attached to his body is controlled by the impressions and tendencies created by his past deeds. Yeah, so it's your past that decides who you are and what you are. To the man that's bound, to the woman who can't get out of her story of who she is, who can't silence the mind from its distractions and its ever perverted view and distribution of love. He's controlled, she's controlled by the impressions and tendencies created by past deeds, and is bound by the law of karma. The law of karma exists in the mind. The law of karma is your mind holding you accountable to your past deeds, to your patterns and habits, to your ignorances and misunderstandings. It will hold you to that wheel of ignorance like a chain. The ignorant man attached to his body, controlled by the impressions and tendencies created by his past deeds, and bound by the law of karma. But the wise man, his desires being quenched, is not affected by deeds. He is beyond the law of karma. Look at that. You can go beyond the law of karma. Karma is not an absolute. Karma is not an absolute. It can be transcended. He is beyond the law of karma. Now, that doesn't mean the law of karma is not there. It means he's unaffected by it. Like all the laws in, say, I don't know, Afghanistan. They have all their laws, very different from us. We're not subject to them. We're not bound to them. Why? Because we know ourselves to not be Afghan. So in the same way, by knowing ourselves to be divine, we escape the laws and the karmas of this physical manifestation as ego, because we know ourselves not to be subject to them. We are beyond the law of karma. Since his mind rests in the Atman, since your mind, your sense of being, doesn't rest in the mind of thought, of constant change and definition, it rests in the knowledge of God, which love exists within the heart. It's ever free, it's everywhere, it inundates everything that you do and see and hear and understand. You rest in the presence of this moment as the divine, as your beloved, as the manifestation of that. And that is what makes life beautiful. That is what makes living worthwhile. That is what makes being important. His mind rests in the Atman. He is not affected by the conditions which surround him. How so? Because he knows he is not that. He is not a body and he is not a mind. So your mind and the conditions that are affecting it are no more important to you, the divine self, than the conditions of the other guy over there, in one sense. So I'm using that in that way. That there's no reason that the coldness of your body should be more important to you than the coldness of your neighbor's body to him. So in that sense, we're free from it. We are not identified with it. In the other sense, later, in the fullness of love, in the ripe ego, that also remains true, but we become concerned about the cold of our neighbor, just as much as we're concerned about the cold of our own body. His mind rests in the Atman. He's not affected by conditions, though he may continue to live in the body and though his senses may move amongst the sense objects, for he has realized the vanity of all objects. And what does that mean? Realize the vanity of all objects. It means pay attention, for crying out loud. That's all it means. Pay attention. Nothing lasts. All the joys that you've collected are now only memories in your mind. They're only thoughts. Everything you've invested in this life, every action you've made, every karma you fulfilled has produced only that. A memory in your mind, a thought. That is it. That is the sum total of it. Be free of them. Know their nature to be vanity, non-existent, unimportant, inconsequential to you in your divine state, only able to bind you as long as you insist on holding on to this nonsensical game of accomplishment, this spinning cycle of doership, getting nowhere and always trying. Touch the grace of God. It's everywhere present, always pure and perfect, close and dear to you, blocked only by your commitment to an ego self of being a body-mind. Be free. How does one know this truth? One knows it by the study of the scriptures, by reasoning, by the practice of austerities, and by direct spiritual experience and insight. So yes, in the beginning it comes from the scriptures. You wrote the scriptures yourself when you put this game of the world together in your true nature. When you designed this puzzle of Maya for yourself, you gave yourself the scriptures so that you could get out. The practice of austerities, meaning the practice of breaking that attachment, that means the process of doing things that are counter to what the ego, body, mind desires. Practicing, ignoring the onslaught of ego. And by direct spiritual experience and insight, you will begin to see the truth that the world you live in is the scriptures. That this world, Maya, when the knot is undone, is the Veda. And everything becomes a vehicle for moving in the love of God. Know that that which has neither beginning, does not exist in the beginning and doesn't exist after the end, but only in the middle, exists only in appearance. That's the nature of this world. Understand that. This world is only an appearance because it doesn't exist before the moment, and it doesn't exist after the moment. So it's temporary. Appearance is not reality. Appearance is not reality. If it was, every dream would be real. Every imagination would be real. This world is nothing more than that. Removing all doubt about the self and detaching yourself from the senses, the seat of earthly desires. Take delight in the blissful self. This is how you find God in the moment. Take delight in the bliss of being. Take delight in the bliss of existence. Discriminate between appearance and reality. Appearance changes. Reality is unchanging. In this moment, touch that which is unchanging within you. Anchor yourself there. Its nature is love. Contact with the things of this world, which are the creation of Maya, should be avoided until attachment, which is a stain on the mind, has been removed through devotion. So yes, for a while, until you get this disease under control, pull away from the objects of sense in this world. Spend more time in solitude, in relationship with the beloved, your nature, touching and learning to be established in that unchanging sense of self, which is always secure and always solid. As a malady, if not treated properly, comes back again and again to trouble a man, so attachment and tendencies formed in the mind by its past habits, if not wiped out completely, torment a yogin by their reoccurrence as he comes into contact with the objective world. This is an important thing. If you suffer because you cannot overcome things, if your thoughts of lust continue to hound you, there's a reason for it. It's because you're not really saying no. You're setting up a facade of no, and you're letting the mind and body argue. And remember, the mind and body are purely mechanical. They can't argue. They have to borrow your sense of I, your sense of sentience, your sense of being, in order to argue with you. If you are loaning your body and mind your sense of being and arguing with them and trying to control them while you are split in yourself, giving them half of your being and you being the other half, you're not going to win. They will hound you until you break. Because the only reason you would share your being with body and mind is because you believe they are you. And the only reason that they would argue with you is because you want to subsume, you want to lose. If you have to argue with lust, you will lose. That is insincerity. That is a lack of earnestness. In sincerity and earnestness, no is enough. If it's a true no, there's nothing to come back and hound you because the mind and body are mechanical. They cannot argue. In conclusion, I'm going to read a paragraph here from Swamiji. It summarizes all of this beautifully. Desire nothing. Think of God and look for no return. It is the desireless who bring results. The begging monks carry religion to every man's door, but they think that they are doing nothing. They claim nothing. Their work is unconsciously done. If they should eat of the tree of knowledge, they would become egoists, and all the good they would do would fly away. As soon as we say I, we are humbugged all the time, and we call it knowable. But it is only going round and round and round like a bullock cart tied to a tree. The Lord has hidden himself best, and his work is best. So he who hides himself best accomplishes the most. Conquer yourself, and the whole universe is yours. Enjoyment is the million-headed serpent that we must tread underfoot. Walk on it. They are not obstacles. They are only thoughts. They are not your thoughts. They are born of a mechanical body and a mechanical mind. They are nothing. Tread on them. We renounce and we go on. Then find nothing and despair. But hold on. Hold on. The world is a demon. It is a kingdom of which the puny ego is king. Put it away and stand firm. Give up lust and gold and fame and hold fast to the Lord, and at last we shall reach a state of perfect indifference. The idea that the gratification of the senses constitutes enjoyment is purely materialistic. There is not one spark of real enjoyment there. All the joy there is a mere reflection of the true bliss that is you. Those who give themselves up to the Lord do more for the world than all of the so-called workers. One man who has purified himself thoroughly accomplishes more than a regiment of preachers. Out of purity and silence comes the word of power. Be like a lily. Stay in one place. Expand your petals, and the bees will come of themselves.